Most organizations don't fall apart from one bad decision. They lose momentum because there's 1,000 small points of friction that nobody stops long enough to diagnose. Let's give a couple of examples. A meeting that ends with agreement, but there's no moves. A leader gives direction, but every department interprets it differently. A strategy that gets approved, but 6 months later, they're still dealing with the same problem. And that's when most of the leaders start asking for the obvious explanation. They say, we need better communication. We need more accountability. We need people to be able to execute. But here's where the organization makes their first mistake, because poor execution is rarely the problem. It's the symptom. And the real problem is hidden friction in the organization's operating system. And friction, it has a cost. It costs time, trust, speed, focus, decision quality, and eventually the organization's ability to turn vision into execution. That's the conversation we need to have today. Because the most expensive problems in your organization are rarely the loudest ones. They're the ones that everybody has learned how to work around. So let's talk about organizational friction. Organizational friction is anything that prevents vision turning into consistent execution. But it's a difficult thing because it rarely looks dramatic at first. It usually looks quite normal. It is that one extra approval. It's an unclear handoff. It's a department waiting on another. It's a leader making a decision without the right information. It's interpreting success differently than another team. One initiative that slowly loses its ownership. None of these things feel catastrophic in the moment, but over time, it creates drag, and that drag can change your entire organization and how it behaves. People stop moving in confidence. They start waiting. They start protecting themselves. They start having side conversations. They start to build workarounds. They start asking permission with things that they should have just understood. Then leaders start looking at that and they ask, why doesn't anybody take ownership? But that's not the right question. What they should be asking is, what is happening within the organization that makes ownership feel unsafe, unclear, or inefficient? Because people don't usually avoid ownership for no reason. They avoid it because the system teaches them that moving forward will create a risk. That is friction. And once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere. So what's the symptom? One of the clearest signs of organizational friction is when you have repeated effort without repeated progress. If you see this in executive meetings, this is probably what it looks like. You come in, you sit down, and you start discussing a problem. But you've discussed that problem over and over again. But it either comes out in a different language, a different report, it comes from a different department. But it's the same underlying issue. It may be staffing, quality, customer complaints. It may be financial stress. It may be missed deadlines. And every time it comes up, the organization treats it like it's a new problem. So therefore leaders respond, and they usually respond with a new meeting, a new initiative, another communication plan, another expectation, a different dashboard, and the pattern keeps returning. That's the moment to pause. Because when the same problem keeps resurfacing, the question isn't, why hasn't anybody fixed this? The better question is, what is allowing this problem to reproduce? That's the shift. Problems that reproduce are most likely a systems problem. It's not an effort problem. And that's where organizations become surprisingly predictable. Because if the operating system rewards urgency over clarity, people are going to start reacting. If it rewards activity over outcomes, people are going to stay busy without moving toward a mission. If it rewards departments' protection over enterprise thinking, silos will build and strengthen. If it rewards escalation over ownership, those decisions will just keep moving upward. And if it rewards speed over diagnosis, the organization will continue trying to solve the visible symptom without looking at the invisible cause, and even protect it. That's the hidden cost. You're not just losing time, you're training your organization to repeat the same pattern over and over again. Because every organization is its own operating system. And I'm not talking about software, I'm not talking about a binder, I'm not even talking about a strategic plan. The operating system is the way that the organization has decisions be made. It's how priorities get translated. It's the information that moves, and it's the conflict that gets handled. It's the way that accountability is understood. It is the way that success is defined. And whether or not the system is intentional or accidental, it produces behavior. Two organizations can have the exact same symptom, but have completely different root causes. One organization may struggle with execution because priorities are unclear. Another may because authority is misaligned. Another may struggle because leaders may agree publicly, but they disagree in private. Another may struggle because everyday initiatives may compete with daily operational survival. And the symptom looks the same, but execution is inconsistent, but the cause is different. And this is where generic solutions, they fail. You cannot prescribe the same fix to every organization just because the symptom looks familiar. And this is where a lot of consultants, this is where they miss the mark. It's because they see a communication issue and they just recommend better communication. They see a problem with accountability and they suggest accountability training. And they even see a poor culture and they suggest culture work. But communication, accountability, and culture, those are not inputs. Those are outputs. And this is produced by your operating system. So the real work is not asking, how do I fix communication? The better question is, how is our system currently making communication unclear? It's not, how do we hold people accountable? But it's, where does ownership break down that makes accountability even possible? It's not, how do we improve culture? But what behaviors does the system repeatedly reward, tolerate, and ignore? That's the diagnosis you need to look for, and this will change the conversation. One of the most damaging things that friction can do is it can distort how leaders see their people. A good employee that starts missing deadlines, a capable manager that becomes defensive, a department that seems to be resistant, or a team that stops bringing problems forward. From the executive level, that looks like a people problem. But sometimes the person isn't the problem. Sometimes the people are functioning in a system that is making their work harder than it should be. Think about the manager that is told to lead a strategic initiative, but not given the authority over the resources that requires it to be executed. Then the deadline slips. What does the organization see? They see poor follow-through. But what actually happened? Responsibility and authority were separated. That's friction. Or think about the department that's expected to improve their performance, but the metrics that they are judged by conflict with a larger organizational goal. The leadership sees resistance. But what is actually happening here? The system created competing definitions of success. That's friction. Or think about the employee who stops speaking up after repeatedly watching concerns be acknowledged and not addressed. What does the leadership see? They see disengagement. But what actually happened? The system taught them that speaking up didn't change anything. That's friction. And this is why diagnosis matters. Because if you misread friction as attitude, you will correct the person instead of correcting the system. And when the organizations do that repeatedly, that's when you lose credibility. People know when the real problem is being avoided. They may not say it out loud, but they know. Let's talk about how friction turns strategy into noise. Most executives, they don't have a vision problem. They have a translation problem. Vision makes sense at the top. It sounds clear and great in the boardroom. It looks like a strong strategic plan. But once it leaves that room and it moves into the organization, here's a few things that happen. The message, it gets filtered into the departments. Priorities start to compete. Leaders interpret things differently. Managers, they translate it based on their own pressure. And employees, they just try to make sense of it. And slowly, it just becomes noise. Not because the strategy was bad, but because the operating system could not carry that strategy cleanly. And that is a hidden cost of friction, because it's not always blocking strategy immediately, but it definitely distorts it. By the time your vision reaches the front line, people are not executing the same thing. They're executing versions of it, and the executive wonders why that we have an alignment problem. But alignment is not created by repeating a strategy more often. Alignment is created when an organization has a clean operating system, translating that strategy and making it into decision. This is why communication alone doesn't help solve misalignment. More communication inside a confusing system just makes more noise. The question shouldn't be, have we communicated enough? A better question is, can every layer of this organization make the same decision based on that strategic logic? If the answer to that is no, it's a translation issue, and that is a system operating problem. Another hidden cost of organizational friction is false urgency. Not real urgency, but false urgency. This kind of urgency appears when an organization is constantly reacting to problems that they should have anticipated, clarified, and resolved earlier. You see this when everything becomes immediate and everything is high priority. Every issue, it needs executive attention. Every department feels overwhelmed. And over time, the organization starts confusing motion with progress. People stay busy, calendars are full, emails are constantly going. Decisions are happening quickly, but the same problems still remain. That's not speed. That is operational drag disguised as urgency. And it is expensive, because false urgency consumes executive attention. It pulls leaders away from strategic thinking. It trains teams to wait until something becomes loud before acting. It makes thoughtful diagnosis feel like a luxury. And it creates culture where an organization is always moving but rarely learning. This is where leaders unintentionally reinforce the problem. A crisis appears. They jump in, they solve it, and they stabilize that moment. And everybody feels relief, but the underlying friction remains. The system learned that the education worked better than prevention. Here's the hard truth for executives. Sometimes the organization keeps reacting because reactions have become the fastest way to get attention, resources, and decisions. That's not a people problem. That's a system signal. The next issue, it gets escalated. And then the next one. And the next one. Eventually, firefighting becomes your operating rhythm. Not because people like chaos, but because the system has trained them that chaos is functional. So at BA Solutions, we do not start with the assumption that the organization needs more leadership training. We start with a different assumption. The organization is behaving exactly the way that the current operating system allows it, rewards, and tolerates. It is not because leaders are powerless. It just means that leaders need better visibility, because you cannot improve what you have not diagnosed. You cannot fix friction that you've normalized, and you cannot create consistent execution if the system underneath the strategy keeps producing confusion, delay, and reactivity or misalignment. This is why the first step is not prescribing. It's by understanding. This is why you diagnose before you prescribe. You understand before you change, and you want to investigate before you act, because every organization is different. Two organizations may both say that they have an accountability problem, but one may have unclear ownership while the other one has conflicting priorities. One may have a leader avoiding a difficult conversation, and one may have outdated workflows. One may have a culture where bad news moves really slowly. The words are the same, but the causes are not. And if the causes are not the same, the solution should not be. This is why it's meaningful for organizational improvement to begin by asking better questions. Not louder questions and not more questions, but better questions. What pattern keeps reemerging? What does slow down execution? Where does the ownership become unclear? Where does strategy get reinterpreted? Where are leaders solving the same issue more than once? Where does the organization learn to work around friction instead of removing it? Those are the questions that will reveal your operating system. And once you understand your operating system, the organization becomes much easier to read. The hidden cost of organizational friction is not just inefficiency, it's distortion. Friction distorts strategy, communication, accountability, how leaders see their people, and how employees understand priorities. Over time, it distorts the organization's belief in its own ability to execute. And that's why friction matters. Because friction that stays hidden, it keeps leaders chasing a symptom. They chase communication problems, accountability problems, culture problems, execution problems, and the system keeps producing the same outcome. So before you ask, how do you fix this? A better question to ask, what is our organization currently designed to produce? Because every organization is its own operational system. If the conversation today has you thinking differently about your organization, download our free Leadership Mistakes Playbook. That is designed to help leaders recognize hidden patterns that create organizational friction before they become organizational failure. Because organizations improve when leaders understand their systems, not just their symptoms. Sometimes the most important things executives can do is stop asking people why they're not executing and start asking what friction is making execution harder than it really should be.